It is difficult if I know it is difficult if you live in a community that does not have regular garbage collection, for example. But we can certainly find ways to containerize and trap that garbage. We have a problem in Jamaica of throwing waste into the gullies.
Yeah,
right. And I mean, I know people will say that it's because I don't have regular collection, for example. And they say, it washes away and they don't care, they don't see it again. But it is impacting us because when all of that waste that we throw into the gullies end up out in Kingston Harbour, then the microplastics that are formed from the plastic waste, because a lot of it is plastic, is ending up in the food that we eat. In fact, it has been shown in recent studies that human feces contains samples that they took of human feces from various areas around the world contain microplastics. So we are consuming the plastics that we are throwing into the gullies and the drains and the the landfills that are not properly maintained. So on a personal level, we can do better.
Titles. So yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, you can go first.
I am Dr. Gard Smith. I am a lecturer in the Department of Chemistry at UWI Mona Hydrogeologist here. I guess you would call me an environmental and analytical chemist in particular, but I do focus on water chemistry, water quality analysis, which I guess we will talk more about. I have been here at UWI. Well, I'm a UWI alum. I graduated from UWI with both my first degree and my PhD. But I am also been lecturing here officially since 2015. That was okay?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay.
And you, Dr. Mandal?
Okay, I'm Dr. Arpita Mandal. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography and Geology, also at same UWI Mona. I've been here last 17 years teaching and working on hydrology, climate change, its impact on water resources and flood risk. And I also work with Dr. Gard Smith on water management, water resource, chemistry, pollution related topics.
Interesting. All right, Dr. Gard Smith, describe your study as a scientist.
Oh my, that is such a broad topic. I don't know if you'd like to narrow it down for me.
Or your study as it relates to water and climate change over the last
how many years?
Yeah.
Well, my work started a while back. My PhD is in water chemistry. I studied marine environment out in Discovery Bay at the Discovery Bay Marine Lab with my supervisor at the time. My graduate supervisor was Dr. Anthony Greenaway, well known in Jamaica for his water studies as well. So that's how I got introduced to it. So at present, since I've been back at the university, I've been involved in a number of studies assessing both water quality and tracing of water using various chemicals that you find in the water to assess, as I mentioned, water quality, to trace water, to basically what we're doing is using the chemistry to help us help us plan how to use water. And so as a result, that comes, like as I said, water quality, but it also involves some hydrogeology, which is why I'm here with Dr. Mandal, and water management. And so as a result, my work has been with a number of government agencies and other water scientists here, or other scientists focusing on water. In terms of climate change, well, water is a very important aspect of climate. We already see the changes that are occurring. So this whole, how do we manage our water resources in terms of less rainfall or more rainfall, whatever the case may be, or quality, all of this is affected by our changing climate. So the chemistry that I do directly links to how we manage our water within the changing climate.
All right. Dr. Mandal?
Okay, so my background is geology, and as you can figure out, I'm not from here. I came here as a lecturer in 2006, And after completing my PhD and postdoc in geology with specialization in hydrology and hydrogeology, my PhD was on groundwater and soil contamination from radioactive waste from thermal power plants in India. But then I shifted after coming here and took up more on the impact of climate change on water resources. I started teaching hydrogeology, developed courses on hydrology and modeling. And slowly I've been working here for the last 17 years, worked on projects in the region, both Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, on climate change and its impact on flood risk. We have worked together, myself and Dr. Gard Smith, on groundwater contamination in the Kingston Basin, supervising an MPhil student. She was awarded 2 years back. So we're still continuing more work on the integrated water resource management in different watersheds in Jamaica, looking at the migration of the contaminants, finding point sources, and trying to also incorporate climate change and its impact on water resources. Because as you know, we are in a period of drought at this moment. And this is frequenting. So we are having short duration, high intensity rainfall. When it rains, it floods. And when it doesn't rain, it's drought. So it's the two extremes we are facing. So I work with climate studies group, UWI Mona, Department of Physics, where I use their climate models. I use the results of the models and apply on the water sector. And I also work on the chemistry side with her. So that's how the journey was as a scientist.
Yes, interesting. Because things aren't the way they used to be. We can't expect water all year round for people who used to, be able to kind of think about things that way. So, what's, in your own words, something most key that you would want to share with people in terms of how things have changed and how they need to be looking at water right now?
Okay, so immediate environment, if you look at Kingston, you see a lot of urbanization and developments, and that is expected because people migrate to cities for jobs, right? And so they will have more demand coming up. But the supply is always limited. And if it doesn't rain, which is what the forecasts are showing, that we have a decreasing daily rainfall trend, you will be depleted of the resources. So maybe we should try to invest in or implement rainwater harvesting techniques, something which is feasible and maybe implement it into. And implementation is lacking, what I've seen in my time here, that there are lots and lots of studies and projects, but not so much implementation. So if every household goes a little bit straight, difficult, but every community can have a common tank or something which they can use when there is a period of drought, or store water when there's excess rainfall and use it for irrigation. Or a few years back, I attended a workshop in Jamaica where they were talking about having separate pipelines for sewage and separate pipelines for kitchen and bathroom and separate pipelines for drinking water, so that the wastewater can be recycled. And but that's a little bit of long investment going on. I think in immediate rainwater harvesting, and also making people aware of how to conserve water, especially in low income and low income communities, or even people who are not exposed so much to the knowledge. Like people who are like us, we know, but some of the people are not aware of it or don't know the regular practices. So something like that, more education, training, because we're not going to get new resources all of a sudden, right? The Kingston is not going to get a new river, and there's no space to build a new reservoir. So we have to manage with what we have. And it's good the forecast and the rationing news are coming, the broadcasts are coming well ahead before, so that people can actually plan on conserving. And that's all I would say. And try to find areas or tap into or basins which are not tapped. So research needs to be done on the limestone. The groundwater is the main source of water, which is trapped in the limestones. Now we need to find out ways of extracting water from other parishes and engineer them to bring to our Kingston, which is mainly suffering from drought. That's all I can say as of now.
Also,
I agree with Dr. Mandal totally. I think we have to look at more ways of conserving, first of all. As she said, it's a limited resource, and with less rainfall, it's becoming even more limited. So we're trying to balance demand and supply. So the NWC in particular, for example, they are responsible for providing drinking water, potable water in our homes, but they have to take it from the places, which means the rivers, the groundwater, which are limited and becoming more and more limited in Kingston. Most of the water in Kingston is underground. So you have to drill wells and then you have to pump wells. But then we have a second part, which is the chemistry part, which is a lot of the groundwater in Kingston is polluted because of the years of growing infrastructure, urbanization. More and more, the city has grown and the infrastructure has not kept up. So we don't have enough sewage treatment, informal communities, and even some formal communities that are still, producing sewage that is not being treated. That's going into the ground. That's going underwater. Underground. So with all that, we're struggling to keep up with the demand as a result, because the supply is not getting any more. In fact, the supply is getting less, especially in areas like Kingston, St. Catherine, Clarendon, all along the South Coast, St. Thomas, all of these areas. And we know what's happening in the West at the moment, in Westmoreland and in Hannibal, thanks to these long periods of drought. So we have to look at conservation more strictly. Everybody needs to do their part in conserving. There's a mentality, I'm Jamaican, so I know there's a mentality we have for, water. Oh, we have plenty of water in Jamaica. Yes, we do, but accessibility and then getting it to the different areas, distribution is a problem. So all of us have to start thinking seriously about how we're going to conserve, how we're going to implement extra storage. And I see the government has this black tank project where they're trying to put these tanks up around. I mean, that's one thing, but there are many other ways that Dr. Mandal mentioned, right? Whenever we do have rain, sometimes we have very heavy rainfall and it just runs off. So we need additional ways of storing that. We probably need a new reservoir for Kingston, but that is beyond us because we definitely need more storage. But even before that, we have to look at conservation. And then the back end, which is the treatment of the water, because we have to seriously consider reusing more.
Yeah, recycling for sure. I want to briefly touch on the science just a little bit from both your perspectives. And this is one of the questions that was there, but I'll expand it a little bit more. All right, so the forecast for regions like ours as relates to climate change and the water cycle is that we'll begin to experience more droughts, we'll have more random showers, but less rain, and more freak events. Have you been able to observe anything in your studies that confirms or deny these forecasts? Like, for instance, I'm able to see a lot of the rivers in places where when I was young, these used to be flowing, and now it's like they're literally drying up. So, what have you guys been able to observe in your studies?
Oh, you start, because you're doing most of the hydrology work.
The closest example which I have seen fluctuating in water level is the Hope River. I take students there all the time, and if you go now, it's dry. That's the takeoff point where the dam is just a little bit above north of Papi. But if you go if it rains, let's say it starts raining from tomorrow, and there is a forecast for rain this week. And if it rains continuously for 2 days, non-stop, and you go back on the third day, you will see it's like a waterfall. So this is a river which is feeding us, Kingstonians, the reservoir. It's feed directly into the reservoir. But when it rains, it just overflows. And all of it goes down and floods out. So these are extreme things I have seen physically going there and working as well. And short freak events, about the floods in Kingston that happen. It rains one whole day and parts of Kingston are flooded out. Not because of, primarily because of excess water, which the drains cannot accommodate. So yes, we are having short burst of extreme events. It's not even a hurricane or a tropical storm. It's just a stationary front or a trough which is causing this excess thing to happen.
Yeah, for instance, the other day we had a cold front in February that completely.
Yeah, Montego Bay was flooded out. And
I'm actually doing reports on that right now.
Yeah.
It's insane the damage that happened just from a cold front.
Yeah.
All right, so what about you, Dr. Gard Smith?
I've certainly seen it in various ways. So, I mean, as I said, I'm Jamaican, so I've seen where, as you have seen, the water levels have dropped so much in places that I'm used to seeing water flowing continuously. I've done work in Rio Cobre with the National Irrigation Commission, and I have seen with my own eyes what happens during these long periods of drought. In addition to the water levels falling, though, comes a problem with pollution. If you can imagine, if you're adding any contaminants to a water system, but there is a lot of water in there, you can imagine that it would dilute. It would dilute these contaminants down to probably levels that you can manage. As the water levels drop, if you're still adding the contaminants, what do you think happened, right? It's more concentrated. So in addition to the fact that we're having less water and therefore less water supply, climate is also affecting, and I'm seeing it in my numbers as well, quality. Because the contaminants are basically, I mean, this is very simply put though. I mean, it's a little more complicated than this, but in very simple terms, the contaminants will become more concentrated because there's less dilution with less water flowing in these systems. And this is both in groundwaters and in meaning water underground, as well as surface waters. So both rivers and streams and the groundwaters, which lie underground in rocks. I have personally seen that in the data, where we're seeing concentration levels increase. We're also seeing more infiltration of seawater, meaning if you look underground, you have fresh water coming in from the highlands, and then you have seawater that can come in from the coastline. The less water we have going in the highlands, what would you think would happen? These levels fall, right? So then what happens? The seawater comes in and pushes back. So what we're seeing in the groundwaters close to shore is more and more infiltration of seawater. We can't drink the salt water. It requires more treatment. So I'm seeing that as well. And it's not just from the levels of rainfall falling, but also we're overpumping. We're overpumping our wells because we need more water. And if we overpump it, if we pump in an unsustainable way, then more and more seawater comes into the groundwater. And then we have to close off those wells, which has happened. We've had to close off many wells, either due to sewage contamination or seawater contamination, or both. And so I'm seeing this with my own two eyes in the data that this has been happening, in addition to the fact that we just have less water to use. So we're causing ourselves more and more problems from the point of view that Jamaica has little control over climate change. Not that we can't do anything, but we have less control because it's the larger countries that have really caused this problem. But we have to adapt, and we have to deal with it. But we have to do the things that will also help our situation. And for too many years, especially with studies not being done, people wouldn't understand how our practices impact our water resources, and that's where we come in. I focus, as Dr. Mandal says, on quality, on contamination and pollution and that sort of thing, and also the chemistry from the point of view of understanding the flow of where water is going, how it behaves. And Dr. Mandal and I, we complement each other because she's a hydrologist. I'm a chemist, so I've seen it happening in so many ways and it's becoming critical if it's not already critical.
Right. And just to add to the drought and the problem of water resource, if Kingston's groundwater was available, he would not be having so much rationing. And as she mentioned, it's not available because of the contamination. So if you look at our work, and even if you contact data from NWC and Water Resource Authority, you will see only, let's say, 10 or 12 wells are in operation, of which 4 or 5 are for domestic supply, that is for potable. The rest are all private. And there used to be, if you go back on the literature, 30 to 40 wells. So you're cutting down the available resources, and which is putting pressure on the on the limited availability. And that's because of contamination.
All right. So, this question now is about sustainability. Yeah, from your perspectives, what is that going to mean for us in terms of water going forward?
Well, it certainly means we have to do. I know it's because we're scientists. Of course, we want to study, but we have no choice. To be able to plan sustainable use of our resources, water and otherwise, we have to understand how. Well, first of all, what is impacting our water resources, and then how changes will keep impacting. To do that, we have to study the water further. Even with the climate models, the climate models are based on information that we already have. And to be honest, Jamaica does not have enough information. It's unfortunate, but although studies have been done over many years, they have either been short-term or incomplete, or they're not long enough. We need long-term information or long-term data to be able to put into models to predict what will happen next. Otherwise, the models are always, and models are just predictions, right, of what happens under different scenarios or circumstances. But for the models to be validated or for the models to be accurate, you need data. And unfortunately, Jamaica still does not have enough data. We're not like some of the other larger countries, like the European countries or the US, like the US EPA has been collecting data for, as we say in Jamaica, since Wapiti full up. For many, many years, Jamaica has not been so lucky. So as a result, yes, we are working with information that we have, but we need to study more. We actually need more data to be able to say, okay, this water system can be used under these conditions in a sustainable manner. And that's what sustainability is about. It's about being able to use our resources in a way that we don't destroy them or we don't deplete them. And so without information, and that's what we are here for, we cannot say what will happen and how to use our resources properly. So just to go back then is that we need more information, we need more studies, we need more data, we need funding to do that, of course. And of course, and that's what we try to do, we need to work with the various stakeholders in water. And we do that now. So we work with National Water Commission, Water Resources Authority. I work very closely with National Irrigation Commission because they are the suppliers or in charge of supplying agricultural water for farms. Without this sort of interaction and collaboration among the various entities, we will not get to where we need to be, to get to a point where we can use our resources sustainably. And just to add, it's not like a one-off thing where you do it and it ends here, because the situation keeps changing. So it requires continuous monitoring. And the other part, which is maybe not such a popular thing to say, but we also need the powers that need to listen and hear and understand that there are certain things that have to be done that may not be popular, but there are certain measures that need to be put in place and enforced, yes. Which
to keep, for instance,
may not be willing to listen to, but the supply is only so much. Like I said, it's an unpopular thing because construction right now in Jamaica is so important for the economy, but the construction in Kingston is concerning for us in studying water resources, because we see the problems. And, when demand keeps going up and supply cannot keep up, what are we going to do?
So true. 2 points before I move on to the next thing I wanted to kind of, you mentioned data, and it is a real issue. Across the region, like a lot of the times when I'm doing reports too, and I think it's the reason why it's important to talk about this is because it's going to come back down to some of the things you mentioned, like needing the studies. You need the data, but you need funding as well. And we even talk about things like loss and damage, if we're talking about climate change, the people who are affected also, this kind of data, scientific studies about things like water systems, in order to access some of the funding from these grants and to fund some of these studies, it requires data.
Exactly.
So it's almost like this weird
chicken and the egg.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Which comes before.
One of the efforts we have to try to solve that is we're trying to set up a data repository somewhere to actually upload data to that is managed by probably a government agency that has that, so then it would be accessible
to everyone. Yeah. And then I guess on to the next question, which is about your projects. So you mentioned working with several people. Just share some details on some of the projects that you're working on. And what may have led up to them, or if other projects may have led up to them, or other studies. Yeah, you can go first, Dr. Mandal.
Okay, so my projects are mostly on water, the extreme events part of water, that is flooding. So I have worked with donors like World Bank, got funding from World Bank, IDB, looking at flooding in Port Maria, which led to an MPhil thesis a couple of years back. Then I also worked on a CDKM, Climate Development Knowledge Network / Carib Safe funded project on Hope Yala's watershed and its impact on climate change, and also working with physics climate studies group. So slowly I got involved into the climate modelers group, which is in the Caribbean from different universities, the other two UWI campuses, and also from stakeholders who work on climate aspects. So we got part of that group as well. And that's how my interest started in application of climate models on flooding and water resources. Then in the last 2-3 years, since 2021, I've been working again with CSGM on the State of the Jamaican Climate, SOJC, the latest one, Volume 3, where we worked on the water sector. So we looked at the different climate scenarios and we tested on some indicators, that is flooding and daily rainfall on daily stream flow. And we used the Rio Cobre watershed as a test case. Myself and Dr. Gard Smith are working on putting together funding for a bigger project on integrated water resource management, both in Kingston and Rio Cobre Basin, as well as a disaster risk management side of it, where we'll be looking at Port Maria. Aside from this, I worked on a bigger project where on Rio Mino watershed. I'm not sure if you heard about it, was part of the PPCR funding for Jamaica, pilot project on climate resilience from Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, where we looked at the sediment budget monitoring. It was a 2.5 years project. We set up pegs over there. We monitored daily on a monthly basis on the rate of erosion of sediments in the upper Rio Mino watershed. So these are the different projects in Jamaica that I worked with, different stakeholders, and also working almost towards the end and on a project in Dominica, which is a multi-hazard risk assessment with Institute of Sustainable Development, UWI Mona. I looked at the floods and landslides only on the physical part of it. So we went down to Dominica, mapped all the landslide locations, the flood locations, did landslide hazard models and flood models, and then we work with a team of social scientists from the department as well who are looking at the socioeconomic aspects. So that's the last project. That's pretty much all I do.
Interesting.
It's a lot.
And
my focus since my PhD work back in the day. I won't tell you how long because it will age me. But my work started in actual marine chemistry. It started in marine chemistry, and I'm still working in the marine environment. So I cover two areas. I didn't mention it before, but because this is more along for water resources, but we can't leave out the marine environment. So I do work in the freshwater environment, so looking at studying groundwaters and rivers and streams, and I also work in the marine environment. So in terms of the freshwater work, Dr. Mandal mentioned that I work both in the marine environment and in the freshwaters. In terms of the freshwater, the work that I'm currently doing, as I mentioned, is with the National Irrigation Commission at the moment. We have a project that has been going on since I think it was 2017 or 2018. COVID slowed things down, but that project is focused on two basins, Rio Cobre and Milk River. In addition, that is because these are two major basins for agricultural water. So their focus in this case was on those two basins. I've also been working with Dr. Mandal in Kingston Basin, and we did some work with the National Water Commission a few years ago as well. The other freshwater work that we're looking at, as she mentioned, is both in Rio Cobre and in Kingston, because that is an ongoing. This is ongoing. These are two critical basins in the country, so we can't just start and stop, as I mentioned. So in addition to that, so that's mostly the freshwater work. Oh no, there's another. I'm also working in I'm partnering right now. We have an agreement with the Water Resources Authority looking at St. Anne region, what is called the Dry Harbour Mountains. That basin, which covers mostly St. Anne and a part of Trelawney. There's a project that it's pretty much come to a close now. We're looking at groundwater quality and the groundwater path, where the groundwater is flowing in those areas, because again, that is another important basin. So that's the freshwater work. Through that, we've been able to access funding from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. It's a UN body that is headquartered in Vienna. They have provided funding for these projects, so I've been able to equip my lab. I have a lab here for water quality, which we're actually working on upgrading as well at the moment. We have all the instrumentation that we need, and we've accessed this through mostly IAEA funding. And these equipment are there to support the water quality aspect of these projects that I've mentioned. But in addition to that, we're doing some infrastructure work. We're hoping to start some infrastructure work if we can access enough funding over the next few months to upgrade the lab to be able to provide more services.
Yeah, that's one question that I did have too. Some of these projects are how do they come about? Is it out of your own interest and initiative and collaboration with others, or do you get approached to do
both? To be honest, as we study as scientists, I guess that's what makes us good scientists, or what makes a good scientist someone who's curious. Just that curiosity. And every time you see something and you see something happening, and I'm sure it happens to Dr. Mandal as well, where it sparks an interest and an idea. Like, what causes that? Or how can that be fixed? Or just that curiosity I've had for a very long time, and that fuels my passion for research. It just keeps going, and as we do one study, more questions come up, and then we want to answer those questions. And there are other circumstances to where we're approached, because for the National Irrigation Commission project, that I was approached by NIC to be a part of that project to assist with this part, because my expertise is in water chemistry. So I was approached, and then I've been working with them since. We set up a probe out in Rio Cobre as well by the dam to keep monitoring water quality. Because as most people are aware, there is a problem in Rio Cobre where there are times when we have fish kills. And if it's something chemical or otherwise that's causing the fish kill, then the dam also has to close off its intake. They have to close the gates so that they're not taking in polluted water as well that is going down to the farms in the south of St. Catherine. So I've been assisting them with monitoring their water quality now for some years, and including setting up a probe that is out there collecting data continuously since last year, which is really good because now I have a lot of data for Rio Cobre on a continuous basis. That's the freshwater work. In terms of the marine work, this is an area that is my passion, the marine work. Don't get me wrong, of course, freshwater is important, but I love the ocean, and that's where my research started. And so at present, my projects in the marine environment, like I said, started in discovery, but has expanded since then. I look at, again, water quality, but towards the support of the ecosystems. So the mangrove areas, the mangrove forests, as well as coral reefs, which are critical to Jamaica. We live on a tropical island, so our coral reefs are very important. They provide buffering for waves coming in, so to decrease erosion. They are there for tourism and for our pleasure. Coral reefs are like what they call the rainforests of the sea. So that's where we find fish and other marine life thriving. So without coral reefs, we just wouldn't have the same island that we have now. Mangroves are also important because they tie the soil, right, sediment right near shore, and they're also a filtering system. So when pollutants are going out to sea, the mangroves provide a good natural way of purifying the water. So these are two. I'm not a biologist, but I'm the chemist on the team. I'm working with a team of researchers here, as well as from the University of Texas at Austin. We have a number of projects going on along the North Coast, particularly in Montego Bay and in Portland, with the Alligator Head Foundation. They are the other partners. So we have been studying the water resources there, the rivers and groundwater in Portland, as well as the marine waters for, it's been quite a few years now, since before COVID, but it picked up very much after COVID, where we have a PhD student from Texas who is studying the coral reefs there alongside Alligator Head. So she collects water samples and they're analyzed in my lab here in Kingston. And of course, I'm co-supervising her project. We had another student who finished last year who was studying mangroves and how pollution affects mangroves. Another student prior to that who looked at the groundwaters and freshwaters in Portland, and also a community education program. So all this is being shared with the community and getting the community's input on how we should manage the marine resources and whole pollution aspects in Portland. We have a group that's coming in the summer that will be continuous. There's a new project called GeoPath, which is geared at getting more people, more students interested in geoscience. So in this type of work, not just from the US, but also in Jamaica. So it is supporting both US and Jamaican students to do short studies in this work that we're doing in coral reefs. And I also have UWI students here who've been working in Discovery Bay as well as in Kingston Harbour. My recent student is looking at water quality in Kingston Harbour and how, again, groundwater coming from the land is impacting the sea. Another student who's writing up, he looked at sediments. So he took samples of sediments going down 2 meters, 6.6 feet or something like that, and looked at the changes in the sediment. And what that is for is to look at the changes over time. So literally looking at what has happened to the climate and other factors over time by looking at the sediment. Because it's a record. It's a record that he's had for basically, this gives us the last 150 years or so in Kingston Harbour. And we've also done some more sediment work in Discovery Bay to look at how the groundwater again is affecting what we see in the coastal zone. So that's mostly my marine work. One of the things that I've become more involved in since focusing more on coral reefs is ocean acidification. And I'm on the executive council for the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. It's called Go On, you can look it up. This council is a global body that has been set up to monitor and manage and try to improve or adapt to what we're seeing in the oceans. One of the big problems with climate change that a lot of people may not realize, because we see the rainfall decreasing, you see that easily. But what's happening underwater to the coral reefs and other marine species is also very serious. Because the carbon dioxide increasing in the atmosphere gets into the water. So it dissolves in the water and it causes the water to become more acidic. So for the scientists listening here, or the chemists or anybody listening here, marine waters or seawater tends to have a pH of somewhere around 8.5 normally in our environment. But as more carbon dioxide or CO2 comes from the atmosphere into the seawater, the pH is decreasing. And small changes in pH causes very big changes in the environment because it's, for the math people listening, it's a logarithmic scale. So it's a big change. It might sound small, but a 0.1 change in pH is a big change for marine species. Their shells depend on, their whole structure depend on a certain amount of carbonate in particular, calcium carbonate in the water. And as pH changes, and that's why we call it ocean acidification, because pH is decreasing. It's not acidic yet, but it's decreasing. So it is called ocean acidification. And that impacts our coral reefs and everything. Shells, so anything with a shell, anything with bone, that requires the structures depend on a certain pH for the integrity of their skeletons to be maintained. And we're seeing serious problems with that offshore. So both ocean acidification and high temperatures. Last year we had record high temperatures, 2023, and it's continuing. Yes, hottest year. And seawaters had some of the hottest temperatures that we've ever seen. And so we've had mass bleaching events. Mass bleaching. Bleaching occurs when the corals you see turn white. And there's a reason for that. Corals are symbiotic organisms. It's animals with this same calcium carbonate structure that I was talking about, and algae that live together symbiotically. The corals are white, the animals themselves are white, but the algae are the ones that give it pretty colors. And so when corals get stressed, like with high temperatures, ocean acidification, anything, pollution, all these various things, this is what we're studying. We're looking at the various stressors that affect or threats affecting the coral reefs in Portland. And what happens is that when they're stressed like that, the algae gets released. And the corals stay back and they turn white because the algae is what gives them color. But without the algae, the corals can't absorb or assimilate nutrients properly. So then they eventually die. And we've had mass bleaching events. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's been very bad. And it's not just in the Caribbean, it's across the world. Because I have colleagues in Australia who are also seeing the same mass bleaching because our oceans have just been so hot right now.
On the fire.
This is all a result of the climate changing. I know people may or may not believe it, but and yes, there are people who say that, and it's true that it's a cycle with climate, but we're talking about a cycle over millions of years, not decades. You see, we're seeing these big changes in decades, from one year to the next, in fact, which should happen over millions of years.
All right. So one final question. You mentioned contamination, and that being a big issue. Behavior is a lot related to that. I know you also kind of mentioned things that maybe need to happen from the leadership side, like government, things like policies. Littering, pollution may be a big part of that. But it's also related to our behavior, in general. What kind of change do you think needs to happen? And this is
on a personal level?
Yes. For us to get to a point where even if we can't completely solve the contamination problem, we can at least, lessen what we're doing. Yeah.
There are measures we can do. Dr. Mandal mentioned some of them. On a personal level, we can cut back on our waste. There are ways to do it. There are many ways to cut back on waste. To be honest, sometimes it's laziness, where we can be so wasteful. We can certainly be more careful about how we treat our solid waste. Everybody can do that. It is difficult I know it is difficult if you live in a community that does not have regular garbage collection, for example. But we can certainly find ways to containerize and trap that garbage. We have a problem in Jamaica of throwing waste into the gullies. I know people will say that it's because I don't have regular collection, for example. And they say, it washes away and they don't care, they don't see it again. But it is impacting us because when all of that waste that we throw into the gullies end up out in Kingston Harbor, then the microplastics that are formed from the plastic waste, because a lot of it is plastic, is ending up in the food that we eat. In fact, it has been shown in recent studies that human feces contains samples that they took of human feces from various areas around the world contain microplastics. So we are consuming the plastics that we are throwing into the gullies and the drains and the the landfills that are not properly maintained. So on a personal level, we can do better about managing our waste in terms of managing our waste, but as in our wastewater, we need to get more into reusing that water. So for example, it sounds like work, I know, but there are little things we can do. We can, for example, catch the water. We can catch the rainwater when it falls. We can catch the water when we're washing and use that to pour on our water beds, for example, instead of using a hose. With NWC water, we can trap some of that same water that we're using and use and reuse it in our own environment. We can find ways of using less water as well. And NWC actually has quite a few resources for that I've found, and other water companies here, like toilets, low flow toilets, faucets that use less, that supply less water but still are as effective. I did a study like that recently where I had a water company come in and check all of my faucets and toilets to check if there was any water being wasted. Luckily, there was none, because we've implemented some of this in terms of waste, and this is one that I need to get into, which I will admit I haven't done yet. Composting. A lot of the waste that we're using, that we produce, does not need to end up in the garbage, in the bins. We can compost. So we can have a little farming in our own backyard where we're using the waste, the organic waste, meaning the food waste that we produce the compost. That will also cut down. As simple as it seems, all of that will contribute to managing these water resources, because it means then less pollution will be getting into our waters, which are then coming back to affect us.
I just want to add some more points onto this. She talked about the contamination in the groundwater, surface water, and water quality. Excess of littering, you see, ends up in our drains, right? In Kingston, there are many drains which are filled with garbage on a day-to-day basis. I won't mention the exact names, but there are drains. If you go just a little bit in downtown near Tinson Pen Aerodrome, I have been there. I've done fieldwork there with students, and I've seen it there. The drains and the gullies are full with plastic bottles, styrofoam boxes, although plastic bags are banned, but food waste too. So when it rains heavily, all of that is now floating and it's washing down like a big river full of litter and ending up in the Kingston Harbor. Port Maria, where I worked extensively on flooding for the MPhil thesis of a student about 2015, and then we visited again just behind the main wall across from KFC. If you look down, the river is full of garbage. KFC bottles, KFC boxes, Pepsi bottles, and also other kinds of garbage.
I'm not saying that it's coming from KFC directly, but people
dropping it over there, throwing it. So that lack of training is not there, that do not dispose garbage in open areas or in the drains. Some places you do see the recycle stations in Kingston, and I myself, and of course people like us, we collect the plastic bottles, pack it up and put it in these recycle areas. But how many people do it literally, right? So the knowledge and teaching and education and awareness that you should not be dumping anything everywhere, that is lacking. That's seriously lacking. Hope River, you go and if you go down to the Hope River at Kintyre, where we take our students, you will see metal waste like fridge and stuff over there.
At the mouth of the Hope River, at the mouth of the Hope River by Harborview, if you go there, you see all the plastic there by Palisadoes, all of the waste there.
So all of that is just lack of lack of what should I say? Thinking. People just dropping it. And so more education and training. We do have cleanups like beach cleanup, coastal cleanup, mangrove cleanup, but that's on a one-off event. But after that, again, it goes back to where it started from.
Because really, we need to stop it at
The source.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we can do. Dealing with sewage is a little bit more tricky
Right.
because then that requires the input of government. We need to, you need communities, in informal communities, it is much more difficult.
Right.
Because of course they're not necessarily sewered and all of that. But certainly, so from that aspect, more input from the authorities would be required to deal with this whole, wastewater.
Mhm.
But there are things we can do, like
We
I
can
said.
do,
If
yeah.
we reuse more, we will decrease how
Like,
much wastewater.
There
is
is this
produced.
new thing you may have seen in Kingston cafes that if you carry your own cup, you get a 10%. So people who are knowledgeable or aware of this, they can reduce, and then the next step that you carry your own bottle. You don't buy water, plastic bottle, or you refill it. You reduce the paper waste and you reduce the plastic. Separation at source is something which is important, but of course, it's not there in every place, in every institution, every offices don't have the three, like you see in the US or in the North America, Europe. So you have three different garbage containers, one for paper, one for biodegradable, one for food waste. We need to have that, places that can afford to have those things. Separation at source is important because everything is mixed up and landing up in the dump.
Yeah. And then that is going back into the groundwater, into the rivers, and then out to sea. So we're shooting ourselves. Right? Many people just think, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But it's not that
Education,
simple.
more education.
I think so.
More education at grassroots level is needed.
Just for people to understand. And then facilitate.
Right.
Because then you can't say separate your waste and then
where
who's collecting it.
Who is collecting all
somebody
the tree?
and then that's where the authorities need to do their part in the collection.
Because I can separate and set up tree bin, but if they are collecting all and mixing it up, then it makes no sense.
All right, thank you so much, ladies.